All right, we're in business. Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Massey, and I'm going to be speaking today about the facts about funeral home selection and services at the time of need. It's 3 a.m. and the phone rings, and as I answer, Paradigm Funerals, this is Michelle, how may I help you? I hear the distraught voice of a young woman on the other end of the line. My name is Lori. My mother just passed away. We're at MD Anderson. Can I ask you a few questions about cremation? This is a scenario that plays itself in, day out, each day in a funeral home. This initial call, the first call, as we call it in the funeral business, is the initial contact between the family and the funeral home. According to the Central Intelligence Agency, there are approximately 303 million people living in the United States today. Out of those, 8.27 out of every 1,000 people will die this year. This means 2,500,000 families will generate a first call to a funeral home this year. Knowing what factors influence a family's decision to make one funeral home their option or another is what we're going to focus on today. Hopefully this will help you whenever it becomes your time to make that first call. After careful analysis of the families that I've been fortunate enough to serve over the last 15 years and some independent research, I'm going to share with you the reasons why families choose a funeral home. Millions of families will seek out the answers to these questions each year. According to the Encyclopedia of Death and Dying, roughly 22,000 funeral homes exist in the United States. 88% of those are independently owned funeral homes. Independently owned funeral homes are not owned by a large company or corporation. The reasons that families choose independent funeral homes is A, reputation. After that, normally it's because the family has a history or heritage with the funeral home, which makes them more comfortable with the funeral home. And the funeral directors in an independently owned funeral home normally have been in that funeral home for years. Their families have worked and lived in the community for generations. This also makes it a more comfortable situation for the families. Also, most independently owned funeral homes have a smaller staff, which means that it's a more independent arrangement conference for the family. They get to sit with the same funeral director through each phase of their service arrangements, which makes them more happy with the services at the end of the day. Your corporate-owned funeral home are chosen for some of the same and similar reasons. A lot of times history and heritage plays a big part. Reputation is a large factor. Most independently owned funeral homes sell to the corporate-owned funeral homes at some point or have in the past, which makes it a seamless choice for the families. Most families don't recognize that it's now a corporately owned funeral home. A lot of times the owners still work there. The heritage and history from the families in the community are still intact with the funeral home, so they still choose those funeral homes to go to. One biggest factor is a lot of corporate funeral homes offer what we call combination locations, which means that a funeral home actually sits on a cemetery property. So that makes a large convenient factor for the family whenever they're choosing funeral home selection. Next, I'll discuss the basic types of funeral services. The first type I'll be discussing is cremation. Cremation comprises 32% of all funeral service selections each year. A cremation can be tailored to fit each and every family's needs. Here in Houston, the cremation cost starts at about $8.95 and goes up from there, cost being a large factor with a lot of families. Also, it's very important for a lot of families who are traveling outside of their hometown for treatment to actually be able to tailor-make their services to fit their needs and time frames, which means that if someone comes to Houston for treatment, say at MD Anderson, and they pass away and they live in Florida, if they choose cremation services, then they have more time to tailor suit the time frame that they need for the memorial services back home. It's also easier to transport cremated remains back than it is casketed remains. On traditional services, your costs start at normally about $32.95. You have a more strict burial time frame with this, and a lot of families are more comfortable with the traditional services because many families have never had anyone that they know in the family's been cremated. So this is a more viable option for them. Also, along with that, whenever you have a traditional service, your burial adds several $1,000s to the final expense. Most funeral directors that I have worked with in the past have a special bond with their families. They interact before, during, and after the services. Aftercare being one of the biggest factors that most of the families that I've spoke with on whenever they talk to me about their experience with the funeral home, I want to know what stands out to them, why they chose our funeral home. Most families, believe it or not, say it's the aftercare that a funeral director focuses with his family. It may be a simple handout on grieving, it may be just a follow-up call, or it may be commemorating a special occasion for the deceased. In conclusion, I have discussed the choices of funeral homes, independent and corporate, also your service options, cremation and traditional. As I've said, both can be tailored, made to fit any family's wishes. Again, 2,500,000 families will make that initial call this year. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, the average life expectancy for women is 81 years, which is good news for us. And for guys, it's 75 years. That means that each and every one of us in this room knows someone right now that probably sooner than later we'll be making arrangements for. And hopefully with the information I've given you today, whenever it becomes your time to make that first call, this information will be helpful to you in making your decision. Thank you.